I never thought a single glance could punch me in the gut harder than a truck full of bad news. Yet there she was, standing by the coffee machine in my office, clipboard in hand, acting as if nothing unusual was happening while I was still reeling from the fact that my so-called wife, me cold, calculated, and impossibly elegant wife, was now my assistant. It all started last month when my parents, who apparently believed in arranging life as if it were a neatly labeled filing cabinet, told me I was to marry someone. Not just someone, but her. And in true American-style irony, the ceremony was in 2 weeks, with barely enough time to Google her name before having to memorize it for introductions. I had expected a stranger. I had expected awkward dinners and polite nods. What I had not expected was that she would stroll into my office, look at me like I just insulted her favorite designer shoes and say, "Good morning, boss. I've prepared your schedule for the day." I blinked. Twice. And I may have faintly mouthed, "You're my wife?" Her eyes, sharp as winter frost yet inexplicably warm underneath if you dared to look too long, didn't skip a beat. She simply nodded, a half-smile teasing the corner of her lips that could melt glaciers if she wanted. "Yes. And don't forget it. Now about your first meeting." The irony was deliciously cruel. Here we were, two 20-something women, officially bound in a marriage neither of us had chosen, forced into proximity by social expectations and family pride, and yet life had thrown us into this absurdly intimate scenario where professional hierarchy collided with the personal. She was my assistant and I was apparently her employer. Her name was Vivian, though I had only ever heard my mother whisper it with a mixture of pride and warning. She was everything the tabloids would call untouchably sophisticated: long black hair, sharp cheekbones, a voice that could command a boardroom without raising an octave. And yet, when she smiled at me in that tiny private way reserved for moments she thought I wouldn't notice, the entire building seemed to hum with a quiet electricity. I hated that I noticed it. The first week was pure chaos. Imagine trying to assert dominance over someone who is technically your subordinate but actually your wife, someone who had probably been briefed by her mother to maintain an air of detached perfection, yet who had the audacity to sneak glances at you over spreadsheets, her brows faintly furrowed as if assessing whether you were worth the trouble. I oscillated between professional frustration, moral outrage, and a growing, nauseating fascination. The second week was worse. I caught her laughing. Not politely, not at something someone else said, but really laughing, head thrown back, eyes twinkling with a warmth that made the cold sterility of the office feel like a crime scene. And somehow in that moment I realized she wasn't just my wife. She was my universe. Of course I had to hide it. The first rule of surviving an arranged marriage in the workplace was pretending not to be undone by her presence. I was professional, I was composed, I was impeccably dressed, yet every time she leaned over my desk to hand me a file, our hands brushing lightly, I felt like a schoolgirl caught in the rain. Vivian had this subtle way of asserting control without being overt. The first time she corrected my calendar, she didn't snap or insist I had opened the wrong file, ready to reprimand her, and she simply looked at me with those unflinching eyes and said, "You're human. But human mistakes waste time." And that was it. No malice, just a gentle assertion of her competence. And it stung in a way that made me both resent her and admire her simultaneously. Our days fell into a rhythm. I scheduled meetings, she adjusted them seamlessly. I made mistakes, she corrected them without condescension. We shared coffee breaks, where she would talk about books I'd never read and movies I'd never seen. Her laughter would echo off the sterile walls, and I'd catch myself staring longer than necessary, imagining what it would feel like to trace her hair with my fingers, to lean close and whisper something forbidden. I hated that I wanted her. And yet, the cruel joke of life was that she seemed to want me too. One Thursday morning, as rain hammered against the office windows, she stayed behind after everyone else left, ostensibly to organize the supply closet. But the way she lingered near my desk, watching me scribble notes, her hair falling in gentle waves around her face, the tension between us became a living thing. My pulse hammered. Her eyes flicked to mine and she didn't look away. "You're tense," she said softly, almost mockingly. "I'm not," I lied, though my fingers shook over the pen. Her laugh was soft this time, conspiratorial, a sound I felt deep in my chest. "Sure you're not," she teased, reaching across the desk to adjust a paper that I had obviously misplaced. Our hands touched briefly, the contact electric, And for the first time, the absurdity of our situation hit me fully. We are married. We are coworkers. We are trapped in each other's orbit. And yet, in that tiny moment, it felt like the entire universe had shrunk to the space between our fingers. Weeks passed and slowly, the walls around her icy demeanor began to crack. She was still elegant, still terrifying in her composure, but I started to glimpse the softness beneath, the moments where she'd glance out the window and sigh, as if carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. I started to talk back, carefully, teasingly, testing boundaries I wasn't sure we were allowed to cross. And she responded, a subtle tilt of her head, a small smile, a quiet chuckle. It was dangerous. It was thrilling. And it was ours. One evening late, after a particularly grueling day of presentations and endless emails, she lingered by the elevator, waiting for me to finish typing. I didn't know why, but I wanted to see her, to feel her presence just a little longer. "You're still here," I said, trying to sound indifferent, though my voice betrayed me. She smiled, faint, private. I liked the quiet. I wanted to tell her that I liked it too, that I liked the quiet because she was in it. But words failed me, and so I just nodded, staring at her, memorizing the way the fluorescent lights caught the shine in her hair, the curve of her smile, the subtle warmth of her eyes. "You should go home," I said finally, a poor attempt at professionalism. "I could say the same to you," she countered, her voice soft but firm. And then, as if daring me, she added, "But maybe we could stay a little longer, just the two of us." And something in me snapped. Not violently, not explosively, but quietly, profoundly. The ice between us melted, not with a grand gesture, but with a shared understanding that we were two women, forced into proximity, discovering desire, affection, and maybe love in the most improbable of circumstances. It was a beginning. Over the next few weeks, we tiptoed around our new dynamic. Meetings became excuses to share private jokes. Coffee breaks stretched into long, meandering conversations. A brush of hands across a table sent shivers down both our spines, and we learned to read each other's expressions with the precision of intimate strangers. Every glance, every laugh, every fleeting touch was a carefully choreographed dance, balancing the demands of professionalism and the pull of an undeniable attraction. One day, in the middle of sorting financial reports, she looked up at me, eyes wide and vulnerable for the first time. "Do you ever wonder if we're supposed to be like this?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, knowing the answer would change everything. "I think maybe we already are," I admitted, and in that admission the final walls between us began to crumble. By the time our families began planning more formal events, more elaborate gatherings, I realized I didn't care about protocol, about expectations, or even about the absurdity of our arranged marriage. I cared about her. Just her. Vivian. My wife. My assistant. My world. And she cared about me. That was enough. Days melted into each other, each one a subtle battle between desire and restraint. We were always in close proximity, a strange mix of intimacy and tension lurking in every glance, every accidental brush of hands. The office had transformed into our clandestine world, a place where professionalism was the surface, but beneath it, an invisible thread pulled us together relentlessly. It was on a Thursday, gray and drizzling outside, that the walls between us began to crumble in a way I hadn't anticipated. Vivian arrived earlier than usual, a rare occurrence that made my heart thump with both dread and anticipation. She didn't smile at first. She just stood at the doorway, clipboard pressed against her chest, eyes trained on the floor. "Morning," I said, trying for casual, failing miserably. She looked up, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in her expression. "Morning," she murmured, voice soft, unsure. She set the clipboard down on my desk but didn't step closer, as if waiting for permission. Permission? The thought made me laugh internally. Since when did anyone need permission to care about another person? But I kept it to myself, letting the silence stretch between us, filled with all the unspoken words that could have been explosive if released too soon. Finally, she broke it, a whisper almost swallowed by the office hum. "Can we talk?" I nodded, heart hammering, and gestured toward the conference room, empty and private. The walk there was a lesson in restraint. Her perfume, soft, floral, yet commanding, lingered in the air, and I realized with a pang that I noticed it far too much. Her hand nearly brushed mine when we stepped inside, and I caught it, holding it just a second too long before letting go. We sat across from each other, the table between us a flimsy barrier against the tension that had built over weeks of subtle touches, teasing glances, and long moments where our emotions collided like storms. "I don't know how to do this," she confessed finally. Her voice shook slightly, betraying the controlled, icy persona she usually wore. "Do what?" I asked, leaning forward, suddenly desperate to close the gap. "Whatever this is. Us," she admitted, biting her lip, eyes darting to the table and back. "I don't know how to be a wife. Or an assistant. Or anything with you." I smiled faintly, a soft, sad curve of lips. "Neither do I admitted. "But I think. We're figuring it out." Slowly. Her eyes softened, a dangerous warmth that made my chest ache. She leaned forward just slightly, enough that our knees brushed under the table. That tiny contact made my pulse spike, and I had to fight the urge to reach across, to close the distance entirely. "Slowly," she whispered, echoing my words, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. From that day on, everything changed. The air between us shifted from tense uncertainty to quiet anticipation. Even the office seemed different, warmer somehow, as if it recognized the subtle evolution of our bond. Meetings became less formal, our banter more personal, each conversation an opportunity to explore the dangerous, thrilling closeness that drew us together. One afternoon, the sky dark with clouds threatening rain, she came to my desk with a stack of files. Her hair had slipped out of its usual tight bun, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and I caught my breath at the sight. "You know," she said casually, placing the files down, "you could be nicer to your assistant." I arched an eyebrow, leaning back in my chair. "I'm plenty nice," I said, though my voice betrayed me. "I just expect excellence." Her lips curved in that teasing smile, the one I had memorized entirely, down to the faint dimples that appeared when she was amused. "Excellence," she repeated, voice soft, almost vulnerable. "That's what scares me. Not your temper, not your demands. You." I froze. The weight of her words sank in, warm and frightening. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Instead, I just nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth I had been trying to deny. The rain started then, tapping against the windows in a rhythmic pattern, and we didn't move. The world outside disappeared, leaving just us, two women entwined in a slow, complicated dance of attraction, fear, and something deeper that neither of us could name yet. Later that evening, after the office had emptied and the city lights reflected in the glass, she lingered near my desk again. Her presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. I didn't know whether to look at her, touch her, or run. I wanted all three simultaneously. "You know," she began, voice low, "I've been thinking." "Dangerous," I muttered, though my heart raced with hope and dread. She smiled faintly, stepping closer, eyes locked on mine. "I think. Maybe we're better than we think. Not just at work. Not just at this marriage." I swallowed hard, words failing me again. She was beautiful. She was terrifying. She was everything I had never admitted I wanted. And yet here she was, standing just feet away, offering a quiet, hesitant hope. "You mean. Us?" I asked, the single word heavy with unspoken longing. "Yes," she said, a tremor in her voice that made my chest ache. "I mean us." And in that moment, the fragile walls we had built, walls of icy composure, of polite distance, of cautious professionalism, crumbled entirely. She leaned forward and I didn't resist. Our lips met, soft at first, testing, hesitant, and then with a sudden desperate intensity that left me breathless. It was the kind of kiss that made the rest of the world vanish, the city, the office, the ridiculous expectations of family and society. All that existed was her, warm and alive in my arms, and me finally allowing myself to feel without restraint. From that evening on, our relationship deepened in ways I hadn't imagined possible. Workdays became an intricate game of closeness and subtle intimacy, shared lunches, hand touches disguised as passing papers, stolen glances across the office. Even the mundane moments, the hum of the copier, the clatter of keyboards, felt intimate because she was there, and I could feel her near and she could feel me too. One night, as we stayed late to finish a particularly grueling project, I noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly as she typed. I reached over, brushing her hair behind her ear. The contact was light, innocent to anyone else, but it spoke volumes in our world. "You're tired," I said softly, eyes tracing the lines of her face in the dim light. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. I didn't argue. Instead, I took her hand, holding it gently. "Come on," I murmured. "Let's take a break. Just for a few minutes." She hesitated, eyes flicking to mine, and then she allowed herself to be led to the window, where the city stretched beneath us, lights twinkling like stars caught in glass. We stood there in silence, the rain streaking down the panes, our fingers entwined, hearts beating in a quiet, shared rhythm. "You know," she said finally, voice almost a whisper, "I never thought marriage could be like this." "Like what?" I asked, brushing my thumb across the back of her hand. "Real," she admitted. "Not just a contract or an expectation. Real. Emotional. Dangerous, maybe. But real." I smiled softly, leaning closer until our foreheads touched. "That's exactly what I was afraid of," I murmured. "And exactly what I want." From that night forward, everything changed. The playful teasing, the subtle touches, the private jokes, all of it deepened. Our love, born from absurd circumstances, began to feel inevitable, unstoppable. Every challenge, work stress, family expectations, social obligations, was softened by the knowledge that we had each other. In this strange, impossible, perfect way. Vivian began to let down her guard, revealing more of herself with each passing day. The icy demeanor remained in public, but behind closed doors she laughed freely, spoke her mind without hesitation, and let herself be vulnerable. And I responded in kind, shedding the last traces of my own caution, embracing the thrill and terror of loving someone so completely. There were small moments that became monumental in memory. Like the time she leaned against my shoulder during a late-night project, exhausted but unwilling to stop, and whispered, "I trust you." Or the day she surprised me with a cup of my favorite coffee, perfectly made. And I realized she had been paying attention to the smallest details all along. Even the conflicts, the disagreements over work schedules, the clashes of personality became opportunities to understand each other better, to grow closer instead of pulling apart. We learned to navigate the delicate balance between professional and personal, between public expectation and private truth. And through it all, the magnetic pull between us never waned. One Sunday, weeks later, as sunlight streamed through the apartment we now shared, I watched her move around the kitchen, her hair tied loosely, slippers sliding across the floor, humming softly to herself. The sight made my heart swell with a quiet, overwhelming affection. I crossed the room, wrapping my arms around her from behind, resting my chin on her shoulder. "I still can't believe you're mine," I murmured. She leaned back into me, fingers brushing mine. "I could say the same," she replied, voice warm and full of promise. And in that simple, perfect moment, I realized that the arranged marriage I had once dreaded had become something entirely unexpected, something beautiful, something alive, something real. It wasn't just love. It was friendship, passion, trust, and laughter woven together into a bond that could withstand anything. The cold walls had melted, replaced by warmth and intimacy. The tension had transformed into comfort and desire. And the future, once uncertain and frightening, now stretched before us like an open sky, filled with possibilities we would face together. Because in the end, it didn't matter that life had arranged this marriage. What mattered was that we had chosen each other. Every day, in every glance, every touch, every heartbeat. Vivian was no longer just my wife. She was my partner, my confidant, my love, my home. And I, in turn, was hers, completely and irrevocably. Even in the most ordinary moments, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft click of the keyboard, the quiet sighs of contentment, found extraordinary joy. Love, it turned out, didn't need grand declarations or sweeping gestures. Sometimes it was in the quiet mornings, the shared glances, the gentle touches. And sometimes it was in the laughter that echoed through an office once filled with tension, now filled with warmth. By the time our first anniversary arrived, there were no awkward silences, no forced smiles, no cold facades. Just us, navigating life together with a love that had grown from absurdity into something magnificent, unexpected, and wholly ours. And as we stood together that night, hands entwined, hearts aligned, I realized that what had begun as a shaka wife as my assistant, a marriage arranged without consent, had transformed into a story of discovery, intimacy, and a love so profound that it defied logic, expectation, and fear. We had stepped into the chaos, the irony, and the impossibility and found something real, something worth holding on to. And in that realization, I knew without a shadow of doubt that no matter what life threw at us, we would face it together, as partners, as lovers, as best friends. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones you never saw coming. The first time we truly laughed together without pretense was a revelation. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind where the city seemed soaked in gray and monotony. We had been working late again, papers scattered across the desk, the hum of the fluorescent lights above blending with the soft patter of rain against the windows. Vivian leaned back in her chair, exhausted but refusing to leave. She had just corrected my third mistake of the evening, her patience thinning but her composure still intact. I made a sarcastic comment about her infinite perfection, and to my surprise she actually laughed fully, openly, the sound rich and alive reverberating in the quiet office. It was intoxicating. I laughed too, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. And in that moment everything felt possible. The walls of awkward formality we'd built around ourselves crumbled entirely. From that night on, our connection deepened in ways I couldn't have imagined. We were no longer bound solely by an arranged marriage or professional necessity. We had begun to forge our own narrative. Days became a mixture of tender intimacy and playful teasing, each encounter a dance of desire and growing trust. I remember one evening as the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the office windows in shades of orange and pink, Vivian stayed late with me. The city outside was alive with movement, yet inside our world time seemed to slow. We worked side by side, papers rustling, coffee steaming, our hands brushing occasionally, sending sparks that neither of us could deny. "You know," she said softly, glancing up at me with that signature half-smile, "I used to think marriage would be suffocating. Arranged marriages especially. But this isn't what I expected. It's good. Really good." I felt my chest tighten, emotions welling up that I struggled to contain. "I feel the same," I admitted. "It's different. But in a way I never knew I wanted." Her eyes softened and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. She leaned forward, close enough that our knees touched beneath the desk, her hand brushing against mine with deliberate care. "I never thought we'd end up like this," she whispered. "Neither did I murmured, my thumb grazing her knuckles, savoring the warmth of her skin. "But I wouldn't change a thing." We kissed then, slow and lingering, the kind of kiss that speaks of long-suppressed emotion and a newfound understanding. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was deliberate, full of acknowledgement, trust, and the quiet thrill of finally giving in to what had been building between us for weeks. Our days continued like this, a balance of professional collaboration and personal exploration. We learned each other's habits, preferences, and quirks. Vivian, once reserved and distant, began to share more of herself, the small joys, the hidden worries, the little things that made her laugh or light up. And I reciprocated, revealing vulnerabilities I had long kept hidden. One particularly quiet evening, we found ourselves alone in the apartment we now shared. The city lights spilled through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Vivian was perched on the arm of the sofa, a book in her hands, her legs curled beneath her. "Do you ever think about how crazy this all is?" she asked, her voice light but tinged with wonder. "All the time," I admitted, sitting beside her, letting our shoulders brush. "But crazy in a good way. The best way." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I'm glad it's you," she murmured, and the simplicity of the statement struck me more than any grand declaration ever could. We stayed like that for a long time, quiet and comfortable, wrapped in the warmth of mutual affection. There was no need for dramatic gestures or elaborate confessions. Our bond had been forged in the small, everyday moments that defined us. The laughter, the touches, the shared silences, the gentle teasing, all of it had created something lasting and profound. Weeks turned into months and our love matured. We celebrated little victories and supported each other through challenges. Work stress was softened by knowing the other was there, ready with encouragement or a comforting presence. Family expectations and societal norms became less daunting, as we faced them together, united in our understanding and care. One afternoon, as we prepared for a casual dinner at home, Vivian paused by the kitchen counter, her hair loose and cascading over her shoulders, a rare moment of vulnerability in her usual composed demeanor. She looked at me, eyes shimmering with quiet emotion. "I never imagined I'd be this happy," she said softly. "With anyone. But especially with you." I reached out, taking her hands in mine. "Neither did I," I replied, voice thick with feeling. "But I am happier than I've ever been." Her lips curved into a gentle smile, and she leaned in, resting her forehead against mine. "Promise me we'll keep this," she whispered. "No matter what." "I promise," I said, holding her close, savoring the warmth of her body and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. "Always." The simplicity of that moment, hands entwined, foreheads touching, hearts aligned, captured everything that mattered. We didn't need grand gestures or dramatic confessions. We had each other fully and completely, and that was enough. As the months passed, our lives became a tapestry of shared experiences, love and understanding. We laughed together, cried together, and faced challenges as a team. Our bond, forged in the unlikely circumstances of an arranged marriage and office proximity, had blossomed into something authentic, tender, and enduring. One quiet evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, we sat together on the balcony, wrapped in a soft blanket. The world below moved with its usual frenetic energy, but up here there was only us. "I never thought life could be this beautiful," Vivian said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me neither," I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But I'm grateful it is. And that we're in it together." She leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. "I love you," she murmured, and I felt my heart swell with a warmth that words could never fully capture. "I love you too," I replied, holding her close, feeling the steady rise and fall of her chest against mine. And in that simple exchange, all the tension, all the fear, all the uncertainty of our early days melted away. What remained was pure, unshakable love, a love built not on circumstance alone, but on choice, trust, and the quiet courage to embrace vulnerability. We stayed there long into the night, wrapped in each other's arms, sharing whispers and laughter, feeling the world fall away until there was only the steady, comforting rhythm of our hearts beating in sync. The city lights flickered below, the stars hidden by urban glow. Yet above us, the universe seemed infinite, filled with possibility and promise. Our journey had begun with shock, irony, and uncertainty. An arranged marriage, an unexpected professional hierarchy, and the cold distance of two people thrust together had once defined us. But through patience, humor, shared moments, and the gradual surrender to emotion, we had found something far more precious. A love that was real, resilient, and wholly ours. As we looked out over the city, hands entwined and hearts aligned, I realized that the story of Vivian and me wasn't just about marriage or circumstance. It was about connection, trust, and the courage to embrace what the heart truly desires. It was about the quiet moments that become monumental, the laughter that heals, and the intimacy that sustains. And as we held each other close, knowing that life's uncertainties would continue to challenge us, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Because no matter what the future held, we would face it together, partners, lovers, friends, and unwavering companions in the extraordinary, unpredictable, and beautiful adventure that was our life. Our love, born from irony and nurtured through understanding and affection, had blossomed fully. It was tender, it was passionate, it was alive. And as we sat together that night, wrapped in warmth and quiet joy, I knew that this was only the beginning of a life we chose, a love we nurtured, and a story that, against all odds, had found its perfect ending. Because sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most extraordinary destinations. And sometimes the love that sneaks into your life quietly, almost imperceptibly, becomes the love that defines everything. Vivian and I had discovered that truth together, and nothing could ever take it away. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.